understood that you could be wise according to the wisdom of this world, you could be strong according to the indices by which strength is measured in this realm, you could be noble in the sense of which men are arranged in hierarchy in this realm. But when we stand before God, the declaration is, let him that glories. Glory where? Because all of these things are of no consequence. Until you connect with God in salvation, you are weak. The wisdom you claim to have is but foolishness. The high standing that men accord you in the visible realm is nothing. You are absolutely nothing before God. So what God does to us is that even though we are called like this, he now begins to introduce us to portions of himself to bring us to a place whereby, despite the limitations in our calling, he can magnify himself in our vessel. That work of imputing himself into us is what we call the grace of God. So you will hear somebody like Paul say, I am what I am by what? Grace of God. Now, if you read scriptures carefully, you will find out that these things that Paul is dealing with here are the things by which everybody in life is generally measured. In fact, if we go to Ecclesiastes, let's see Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, I think it should be verse 11. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11. Help me. Okay. I returned and saw under the sun. Notice. First, the metaphor that is used to describe life is that it's called what? A race. Have you ever heard the term used in the world? They say rat race. Have you heard that before? So even society recognizes that life is a race. And the way they describe it is a rat race, an endless running around, not knowing what is pursuing you and not knowing what you are pursuing. It's a rat race. In fact, if you are one that has been to Lagos, the rat race is heavily depicted in Lagos. In fact, if it's whether you travel by bus or you travel by air or you travel by train, the minute you appear in Lagos atmosphere, pressure from nowhere. Pressure is a spirit that lives there. Lives there. You will just see people who are in a hurry. They don't know where they are going. They are just in a hurry. It's a mad rat race. So people sleep at 3 a.m. to go back to work. They close at 10 o'clock before they get to their houses. Maybe it's 1 a.m. There's a race. But when the world describes this race, it is a competition between men. So the one who wins will feel that he has elevated himself above his fellow man. Are you with me? So in the world's definition of the race of life is a competition between men. So if I find an advantage in that race, I can consider myself to have excelled above my fellow man. So he says the race is not to the swift. Now he begins to define this race in accordance with spiritual indices. Meanwhile, in the worldly definition of a race, it is the swiftest that wins. The one that is fastest. The one that is able to develop their muscles in such a way that they can outrun their competitors or their competition. But in the spiritual race, you will find out that your competition in that race is not your fellow man. In spiritual races, we are not all racing in the same direction. Now, what I mean by that is, even if all of us are trying to make it to heaven, every man's race track is unique to his calling. Are you with me? So just as you have in a competitive race where there are tracks, and in that race, if you come out of your track, you would have considered to have defaulted. Is it not true? So in spiritual things, you are on that race. Your competition on that race is not your brother who is also running. Your competition in spiritual races is yourself. You will only be able to claim the prize if you are able to conquer yourself. Are you with me? So what you will hear somebody like Paul say is, I beat my body. My concern is not my brother that is running. My concern is me. Lest after I have preached to others, I become what? So in this race, my competition is not bright. My competition is myself. I must consistently look at myself in the mirror to find out whether I have begun to take the shape of what it is that God has in mind, so that when I run, I will not have run in vain. So the race is not to the swift. So in a spiritual race, your speed is not what counts. It's your ability to maximize grace. You will hear my father in the Lord say things like people take off like a tornado. They are attempting to run a spiritual race based on physical indices. They think that if they start ministry fast, then people will say they have succeeded. They think that if they become visible, all of a sudden people will say, great man of God. They forget that in this race, the man who is waiting, or the one who is waiting at the other side, is not going to reward you because you arrived before your brother. Are you with me? The great one is waiting at the end of the race, not to reward those that arrive first. He's waiting at the end of the race not to reward those who arrived fast. He's waiting at the end of the race to reward those who arrive in the image of Christ. So when you arrive is not as important as how you arrive in spiritual races. So the preacher here was trying to say that the race, if you now begin to measure this in spiritual balances, if you begin to put this in spiritual context, you will realize that it's not how fast you run that determines whether you will win. And that's what I'm trying to teach you tonight. What determines whether you win, how you arrive at the end of that race, is in your ability to maximize grace. And this is why Paul's life is such a beauty to study. It's a beauty. Paul says this is a word, popular saying, and is worthy of acceptation. God came to save sinners, of whom I am chief. Paul recognized that if you were going to choose men of noble birth, choose men of wisdom, choose men of stature, he will never qualify. The only reason he qualified was when he touched grace. He learned how to maximize it.